Right, so this episode, we're going to be building a box bike. So the first thing that we need to do is get the bike out of the box. This have staples in it, so we'll just rip those open. And then what you're going to want to do is just have a look to make sure there's nothing loose in here that we need to get out first. And then we'll just, generally, they come out easy if you lift the back wheel up first and then grab it out like that. Then you can rest that there. Get the accessories out. So this will probably be the pedals. We'll just pop that there for now. And then we can use the box for all of the rubbish. So we'll just start getting all the packaging off and then we'll get the bike in the stand and start building it. So I'm just using a pair of side cutters just for the cable ties. It'll just be a lot easier than using a pair of scissors. And then the rest of it is just masking tape. And then what we're going to want to do is once you've freed up the wheel, just make sure pedal forwards, remove the front wheel out the way. And then what we want to do is just free up the seat first. The bolt there, the bolt from the reflectors come off. Take the reflector off for now. We just grab a multi-tool. It's just quite a simple tool for now, just while we're putting it loosely together. So we'll get the seat, just use a 4mm Allen key. And then once that seat is in, we'll just get this in the stand now. So now that's in the stand, it's just going to be a little bit easier to get the rest of the packaging off. So I'm just look out for these little plastic guards that are in the wheel. You see people riding around with these still in. So these little plastic things, just make sure you're getting rid of that and all the rubbish in the box. So this is a Boardman ADV 8.9 gravel bike that I'm building up for a friend of mine. He's just getting into the gravel biking. So pretty good spec for the money really, 2x10. It's got hydraulic GRX brakes on it. So these bikes do come basically 80-90% assembled. So all you've got to really do is put the handlebars in, pedals on, maybe set up the gears or run through the gears at least, and then put the front wheel in, pump the tyres up, and it's pretty much ready to go. But it is worth just checking everything over and making sure it's all tight and been put together properly, because you don't ever know who's putting these bikes together. Don't just assume that everything is tight. So just to save these handlebars hanging here for too long, make sure your forks are facing the right way. Stem bolt's probably loose. What you're going to want to do is just take out these stem bolts. So again, you can just use a multi-tool or a standalone Allen key. Just take the bolts out. There'll be 4 bolts. And just be mindful that there are some crush washers in there. You're just going to want to make sure that the washers come off with the bolts and you don't lose them. So either put them in your pocket or if you've got a little pot somewhere. Just something you can use, just like a lid off a spray can. Just pop your faceplate in there and your bolts just to keep them safe, just for the time being. So what you're going to want to do is get the faceplate, maybe just 1 bolt to start with. Just get the 1 bolt in the faceplate and you can just offer the handlebars up. Thread that in by hand, get your multi-tool and just do one of the bolts up just for now, just to hold that in place to save it falling on the floor. And then you can grab the other bolts, just nip it up just a little bit, and then we'll get the rest of the packaging on and the other bolts in place. Okay, so once that bolt's in, it just keeps the bars up and out the way, so we can then just get the rest of this packaging off the handlebars into the box. Okay, so once most of that packaging's off, we're just going to go back to our pot and grab the rest of the bolts. So they've already got a little bit of Loctite on there, so you'll see that there's some blue that looks like paint on the bolt thread, and that is just a little bit of Loctite just to stop bolts from coming undone. So we'll just do these up by hand to start with. Make sure that you put the little washers on. So sometimes they are crush washers just to stop the bolts coming loose, but looking at these, they are just washers. But just make sure you've got a washer on each bolt, so that just stops the bolt from eating into the stem faceplate. So we'll just do these up by hand. We'll do up the handlebars. So you've got a choice of tools really. So for ease, you can just use like a multi-tool. So that's got all the sizes you really need. So it's like 4.5, a 2.5 and a 2 on there. Or you could just grab some standalone Allen keys. I quite like these ones because they're color coordinated. So I know that a yellow is the 4mm that I need. So that sometimes is a little bit better than using a multi-tool, or you could just use a little ratchet. I've got a Toe Peak ratchet rocket, which I do recommend, is really good. But for this, just to make it a little bit better, is I'll just grab the yellow 4mm and then we'll do up the stem bolts. Right, so we're just going to use the yellow 4mm. So you can use the ball end. That will just do it up a little bit easier, but only use the ball end when you're just doing it up loosely. and then we'll move over to the square edge when we do it up tightly. So one thing to note with the stem bolt is just nip it up to start with. And then once it starts to feel tight, you want to ideally work in like a crisscross pattern. So just to get an even tension on the bolts, is just work in a crisscross pattern. And then as soon as they're nipped up with the ball end, so this one can probably go a little bit tighter, you can then move to this. But one thing to note with the stem, which some people forget, is you want to make the gap on the top the same as the gap on the bottom, unless your stem states otherwise. So some stems now, you will see that it says 0 gap. There'll be an arrow here, and it will say no gap. And if it doesn't, then you do want an equal gap top to bottom on your stem. Just check our gap. So I just need to go off a little bit. So if you release tension on the bottom, half a turn or quarter of a turn, and then add tension on the top, half a turn or quarter of a turn, you're then somewhere near where you want to be. And when it's loose enough, you can just roll them back to where you want them. We will just nip these up now for now. So we'll do that and then work to the opposite side at the bottom and just nip that up, and then back to the top, nip that up, nip that up. We will come back in with a torque wrench when the bike's on the floor and we've got the handlebars properly adjusted. But for now, that is the handlebars fitted. Okay, so that's now the handlebars in, somewhat tight, just so they're not sliding around and they're all fixed in there. We will do them up properly when the bike's back on the floor, and then we can just go back and continue just taking off the packaging. So they do just add all of this masking tape to stop everything getting scratched, but just means you spend most of your time removing packaging. So make sure that's off, and then you could come back with some alcohol and just get rid of the residue once the bike's done. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is just fit the front wheel. So same again, remove all this packaging. There will be a disc guard on the wheel. So as you can see here, there's just this plastic thing, which when it's in the box, that is just stopping the disc from bending. It is just held on with an elastic band. So we can just get rid of that. And then on this side, you've just got a cap, just to stop the end caps from getting damaged, and then maybe just push your reflector down to the point where it wedges between the spokes. So this, on this bike, is a bolt through axle, so it's not quick release and it's not a nutted threaded axle, it is bolt through. So what we need to do is just pull that out. And one thing to do for sure, just put a bit of grease. So you can see there's a tiny, tiny amount of grease on this axle. I wouldn't say it's enough. You do see bicycle axles that aren't greased and they are just seized in. And then if it's super badly seized, then you can end up having to cut your wheel out. Just a little bit of grease, you don't need loads, just on the shaft and on the threads, and just rub that round. If you don't want to use your fingers, you can use like a paintbrush or something, but I don't mind. Once you've got your axle greased, grab your wheel, and you can notice you've got disc side and non-disc side, and then you've got a disc brake caliper on this side, so just make sure you are putting the disc in. So this all should be lined up straight out of the box. Just get your axle into your left hand, wheel in your right hand. Just offer it up, make sure that disc is going between the wheel. Put your axle in lightly and then just jiggle it around until you find that it goes in. Just push it in, and you can just thread that in by hand. So then once that's in and you've tightened it up a thread or two by hand, you can just get your 6mm Allen key, it's a 6mm on here, just into the end and just lightly rotate it. So you can torque it, but your front wheel does come out quite often. So nice and tight with an Allen key, and that is good enough. So that's your wheel in there. Just check your brake works. And ideally with a disc brake, you want the disc to be running pretty much exactly between the pads. So you'll see the disc and the two pads to the side of it. You want the disc running pretty much exactly in the middle so it doesn't rub and you get the best sort of performance out of your brakes. The pads are touching the disc at the same time. This one looks pretty good, to be fair, but we'll leave that for now. And that is pretty much the front wheel and handlebars in. Next step we'll do is the pedals. So most people will run clip-in pedals, and all they'll have their own preference on pedals. So the pedals that you do get in the box are literally just cheap pedals, just so you've got an option there to ride your bike straight away. But most people, super high-end bikes don't even come with pedals because they do just assume that you've got your own pedal. But for now, we're just gonna put these pedals on. Probably not gonna leave these toe clips on. So if you've ever ridden with toe clip pedals, you'll know how sketchy they are. So I'm just going to take these straps out for now. These straps actually whilst we're on this subject, these toe straps are really useful in the workshop just for hanging things up, or if you do take out your handlebars and you need to tie it to somewhere, you can just use these. So if you've got these pedals with the toe straps, maybe just keep hold of these, because they do come in useful in your garage for hanging stuff up, or even in your house just for strapping things down, or in your boot of your car or whatever. So I have done a video on fitting pedals, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but just note there is a left and a right, and there is a certain direction of thread. If you haven't watched that already, go back to my other video and watch how to fit bike pedals. There are some mistakes that you can avoid, but first of all, we will just grease these pedals up and fit them. So right hand pedal, bit of grease, pedal spanner, and just tighten that. They don't need to be crazy. Same again on the left side, dab of grease on the threads. You definitely want to grease your pedals, because if they're stuck in and you've got no intention of removing your pedals for a couple of years and you're leaving your bike outside, then they can seize. So just a little bit of forward planning and just get some grease on those threads. Might save you or your bike mechanic in the future. So just one simple step that you shouldn't really skip out. That's the pedals on. Pedal spanner again, tighten them up. Okay, so I can already hear that the back brake's rubbing, so I'm just going to go in and just see why. So I can already see that there's more gap on the right hand side of this disc than there is on the left. So it normally means sometimes on these flat mount calipers you can do up the bolt, and then as you do it up it will pull the caliper over without realizing. So you might be able to, if I put my mic next to that, the brake is rubbing. You can just double check, just pull the brake a couple of times. Yeah, it's rubbing. Brake's rubbing is annoying, so that might be passable for some people, and you might think, well, the brake pads are going to wear down at some point, but ideally, you do get some brakes you just can't get to not rub, but we'll at least give it a go. So we'll get the yellow Allen key out again, which is the 4mm. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a 4mm on the bottom of here. Yep, so on a flat mount caliper, the 4mm are underneath the frame. So we're just going to nip both of those off, and the brake bolts aren't that tight at all, so I'm definitely going to check everything over. One thing you can do is a little quick adjustment, which might work. If you're successful with this, then game on, but if not, you might have to fiddle around with it more. But loosen off the bolt, pull the brake lever a couple of times, and then hold it on, keep it held on, and then just nip up the brake bolts before you let go, and then spin the wheel. No, not successful. So what I tend to do is just, if you can get something light underneath, even a little bit of paper on the floor or something, and just look at it downwards, you can see the gap between the caliper. Move it by hand and then just nip one up at a time, and hopefully when you nip that up, I'm just using the ball end for now because I'm not doing it out that tight. And then once you think it looks like you've got gap either side, still a little bit of rubbing. So yeah, definitely as you do it up, it can pull it aside, so you just want to get a firm grip on that caliper. There is a slight bend in that disc. You can get out if you need to, but I don't think it's bad enough. Right, so that's just taking a couple of seconds just to fiddle around with that caliper. And there's, you can hear, all I can hear is the free hub there. So now I know that those bolts are tight. I'm not going to torque them. I've done this for so long that I know how tight these brake bolts need to be. And yeah, as long as they're tight, you're not going to go too far wrong. But if you never worked on bikes before, then it is a good thing just to get a torque wrench, just to save you under tightening and also over tightening and stripping the thread, because that can be game over for a lot of components. So now I know that the back disc brake isn't rubbing and the caliper's tight, so that's the rear brake done. We know the front brake isn't rubbing. I am just gonna get my Allen key. All I'm doing is just nipping it up a little bit more. Just added a quarter of a turn on there, so who knows, they might have torqued that before, but it does just seem a little bit too loose. So all I'm using is that, with not my hand right at the end. I'm not getting loads of leverage on it, just sort of holding it like that, putting it in and just nipping it up. And for me, that is fine. I've ridden bikes long enough to know that that's not going to come undone. One thing else I've noticed, something you see on loads of bikes and just people don't know about it, is head shake. So that wheel is in there tight, but the fork is moving to and fro. So that is what we call head shake. So if you were riding along and jabbing on your front brake, your forks would be moving. So the most simple thing you can do is just make sure the pinch bolts on your stem are loose. 4mm again on the top. You don't need to crank this up, but it's basically a compression bolt. So as you do this up, it's pulling everything together. So once you do that, just nip it. Doesn't need to be tight, right? And you can go back And that, there's no play at all now. And that is going to make your bike feel so much better. And then you can just go back in, just use the ball end on these pinch bolts. So once you're happy that your headset's all together fine and your stem bolt is done up to the point where you haven't got head shake, you can then come in with your pinch bolt, which is what stops your bars from spinning around the fork steerer and holds it all up nice and tight. But all of your bar controls and stuff, because they might need adjusting, when the bike's on the floor and you stood over it, we'll just go through everything again, and maybe I'll just show you what a torque wrench looks like and how we torque the front bolts. Okay, so that's the bike basically all together. I haven't run through the gears yet, so that's going to be the next thing. We'll just run through the gears. On this bike, it's got the drop levers, so the gears are on this lever here. All you're going to want to do is just run through it slowly. If you hear something slightly not sounding right, a bit of a click, something like that, then you can adjust it. Feels good. I might just stretch the cable, which some of you might disagree with, but I just hold the mech, just click it a couple of times and sort of simulate what's going to happen on the first couple of rides. So now that's started clicking. So all I'm going to need to do to tension your cable, just turn this barrel adjuster, a couple of screws, and that's basically stretched the cable before we've even got riding. So it's just eliminating a problem that you might see after your first ride. Some of you might disagree with pre-stretching your cable. Just don't do it too hard that you're gonna break the mechanism in your shifter. We'll just have a look at the front now. So front gears, same story. There are basically, some people, you might not know this, but on a shifter like this, there's 4 clicks. Although there's only 2 gears, there's 4 clicks. Each gear will have 2 clicks, and that's basically a trim. But that is a trim for the gear that you're in. So as your chain line changes, and when you're up into this gear, you might just need to shift over your front derailleur slightly just to avoid the chain rubbing on this front derailleur. As you move across up into this big ring, you may just need to give it one little click, and that is called a trim gear. So you're just trimming that mech on the front just to save it rubbing. Just gonna go around all the bolts now. So front derailleur, rear derailleur. I know I've done the rear disc. Maybe check the crank bolts and then everything else. And then once we've done that, we'll get the bike on the floor, just the handlebar, roll, and make sure it's all straight and tight. And I'll show you the torque wrench as well. And also we need to pump up the tires. Just got a track pump here, just makes life a little bit easier. On this bike, we've got Presta valves. So you'll probably find Schrader valves and Presta valves, just to keep it simple. A Schrader valve is like what you'll find on a car, and a Presta valve, you have to release this small valve core, and then to release pressure, you just do that. And that's also what you need to do to allow air to go in. So this pump has got 2 heads on there, so this is suitable for both valves, and you'll just push that on, pull the lever back just to lock it in place. And just to start with, I think we're just going to go 50 or 60 psi. If you're not sure, your tire probably will have a max and minimum pressure. Just for reference, let's have a little look. Max pressure 58, and we've gone up to 60, so we'll just drop that down a little bit. I mean, you can overinflate tires a little bit, but right, so that's 50. We'll leave it at 50 then. And then if you want it harder for the roads, you can go up to 58, and for gravel riding, you can drop it a little bit lower depending on the sort of terrain that you're riding on and how wet and muddy it is. So we're just going to go and do the front wheel now. Same again, loosen off the valve core. 50 psi, release, do up the end, and then don't forget just to put your little dust cover on, and that is that. So that's the bike assembled. I am just going to go around and check all the bolts now. Be a 5mm, just check everything's tight. So what you don't want happening is your derailleurs to move around or slip, so just double check they're all tight. And also this cable clamp on these derailleurs. So on this mech, so I will put in a clip of this. If you're ever unsure on how to set up these mechs, basically you'll go up into top gear, so as far as your shifter can go, and then drop one tiny click, and then there's 2 lines here which need to line up, and yeah, they are perfect. So if you've got this front derailleur, which is an RX 400, and I'm pretty sure 105 and things like that use the same now, is that you will shift up all the way, drop it one tiny click, and these lines should line up. And if they don't, you've got this little grub screw here to add tension to get those to line up. But if they don't line up, your gears won't work properly. So that's just one thing to note. So I'm happy that those front gears are tight and it's shifting perfect, and the lines are where they need to be, and the rear gears work, and everything is tight apart from the cockpit. So we'll need to choose how much our bars are rolled forward or backwards. Generally, you want a nice straight line from the frame, but because it's in the stand and the bike's at a funny angle, you're not really going to know until the bike's on the floor. And then also just make sure that everything's in line. And yeah, that's good. And then you can set your saddle height and take it for a ride. So I'll just get the bike down now. Right, so what I would tend to do when I'm setting up a bike for myself, so I'll just move it this way. There's no real right or wrong for how much you're going to want your bars rolled back, but then you just maybe put your hands there and just get it so it feels quite comfortable. That feels nice. And then we will just nip the Allen keys up just with this 4mm again, and then I will show you what a torque wrench looks like. Okay, so before we do that, I'm just going to make sure the handlebars are straight, which they're not. They're only a little bit out. There's a few ways of doing this. I mean, you can try and line your stem up with the front wheel, but it's nigh on impossible. So what I do is line up the straight part of the bar with the axle. You just get over it and just try and line up the straight part of the bar with the front axle. And I feel like that's an easier way than trying to line up the stem with the front tire. No matter where you're stood, it's not going to quite be straight. So I'm happy with that. We've eliminated the head shake by tightening up that bolt, which we've already done. And then same again for these pinch bolts. You can put a torque wrench on it. It tends to be about 5 Newton meters. So you might see on some stems, it'll say 5 with an N and an M, and that is referring to Newton meters, which is giving you your torque setting. So if you had a torque wrench, you would set it to 5 Newton meters or do a conversion online to foot pounds or inch pounds. So yeah, the handlebars are straight. Handlebars are where they feel comfortable. So the next step would be to torque those up. I'll just get the torque wrench now. Right, so this is a torque wrench that I've got. It's just a manual one. You can get digital ones and different variations of these ones. So as you can see on here, there are numbers with values. So it goes all the way from 5 all the way up to 25. So on this one, we've got the number 5 just here. So we will just twist this inwards until we get to number 5. And then when the 0 is in line with that, we know that that's at 5. And then we can just lock that back in here. And that's set at 5 Newton meters. And then we've got this end with a 4mm, and that is your torque. Just make sure you've got this switch set at the right direction. So for tightening, it's going to be right. So moving on to the handlebars now. I've just checked the gap. So the gap here at the top and the gap at the bottom are pretty much exactly the same. You don't want minimal gap here and a massive gap at the bottom. Likewise, you don't want a tiny gap at the bottom and a big gap at the top, unless it's got the 2 arrows like I mentioned before, which says on there no gap, and that is just a different design of stem. Right, so we've got the torque wrench. It's set at 5 Newton meters with a 4mm bit in there. I've done them up near enough all the way with just my Allen key, but we will don't need to necessarily wait for the click straight away, but just do them up roughly the same. So when the torque is reached, you'll notice it won't go any longer and it will click. So that is torqued. So then you'll go to the opposite side, click, back down to the bottom, click. And then once you've done them all, just go back, just double check, because sometimes as you do them all up, it will change things a little bit. So click, click. And that's all 4 stem bolts torqued up to just 5 Newton meters all across them, and they're equal. So the gap is nigh on exactly the same, top and bottom. And then if you really want to, whilst you've got your torque wrench out to these bolts, there'll be a 4 as well. Just don't crank them both up. You can just use it like a normal ratchet. Click. And then go back to the top, and that is your torque settings done on your handlebars. So yeah, that's the bike done. I'm just going to give it a spin now, just make sure everything's working properly when you ride it. Sometimes you can find the gears act differently when you're riding it outside compared to when you just got it in stand. So yeah, that's the bike done now. It's all ready to go to its new owner, and yeah, that's just a little video on how to build bikes. Just an important thing, just to double check that everything's tight and assembled correctly. I will be doing more detailed videos on other bits. So as I mentioned before, I've already done a video on how to fit pedals, and then also understanding your gears, which is more related to just what they do and what they're there for. But as the channel progresses, there will be more tutorials and information on how to sort of do your own sort of home maintenance. But for now, that's it, that's done. And yeah, we'll be keeping the push bike content to a Sunday at 6 p.m. And I have also got a non-push bike related video coming out this Wednesday at 5 o'clock. So if you're interested in cars and things like that, then tune in on a Wednesday. But if not, bike stuff is going to stick to a Sunday. So yeah, cheers for watching, cheers for your support, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.